Okay, now we move into the subtypes. All right, this again for me is the meat of the potato. This is what shows us what is causing problems. So there's inflammatory depression. There's traumatic depression. There's metabolic depression, which is a fancy term for energy production and how well or not well we produce energy. There's light-induced or electromagnetic depression. There's hormone-related, and we call it endocrine because that includes our neurotransmitters as well, but basically, how are our cells communicating? Because if our cells don't communicate well, in a healthy way, then you can have problems with depression. And then we have purpose. And I'm not going to talk too much about that, but it's really important to align with your values, what you truly value, because you're going to stress yourself out daily if you don't do the things that you value and actually align with your purpose, at least somewhat. Obviously, we're adults and we have to do things we don't want to, but you need to recognize when you're away from your value system. So let's talk about inflammatory. And I also call this immune, inflammatory immune, okay? Because it's not, there's this idea with inflammation is, inflammation is like it's a fancy term to say that it's like there's a little mini fire going on around your cells. Okay, so anybody who's heard of any condition ending in itis, gastritis, arthritis, laryngitis, right, bronchitis, encephalitis, it's all just different ways to say inflammation at a certain tissue. Okay. What we usually see with this is it's a low-grade buildup. Okay, very low grade, very slow. All of a sudden, it builds up to a point where you're getting symptoms of depression. So I just want to draw your attention to that in particular. That is going to tell us that we're having some immune inflammatory problems. Now, normally it's not something that comes up on a CT, right, where we actually have like a severe brain trauma and we get in massive amounts of inflammation from it. It's low grade. It's happening around the cells of the brain. It's not this massive reaction. The other one you can see is delta doing the opposite, where it goes blue. And this is usually chronic immune depletion, which is also a problem. Okay. Now, 80% of the time, you can get 80% improvement by fixing the gut. Okay. So what we look at, like we do lots of different tests on the gut, generally when we're trying to help people out, but what happens is this is the inside of the gut. And for those of you who didn't know, we're basically a big donut. We're just a human with a hole through the middle, right? So we have this hole going through the middle of us. It's technically not even part of our body, just this hole. And we have all these microbes in there. Bacteria, viruses, fungus, and parasites. And a lot of these are actually good for us. A lot of them aren't. We want them to be in good balance. A lot of research lately has come out with C-section birth. Anybody who has been born through C-section actually has different makeup of microbes in the gut because they get inoculated with skin bacteria through the abdomen instead of vaginal bacteria. Okay, it's really interesting. We're actually able to correlate health problems by looking at the DNA from these microbes better than we can by looking at our own human DNA. Obesity is better predicted by looking at the DNA of the microbes than by looking at our DNA. It's incredible. Right? We're using things like fecal transplants where you literally take feces from someone else who's healthy, capsulate it, take it, and people are curing their Crohn's disease with it. It's incredible how much of an effect those microbes have on our body. And the reason it happens is the effect that these microbes have on our immune cells. Okay? So it has the ability to balance or imbalance the immune system. And there's the way the immune system works is it's a little more complicated than we like to think. We usually say, we either inhibit our immune system or we activate it. That's actually not true. We actually shift the balance of the immune system. So if you imagine the immune system is a three-legged stool, okay? We need all three of those legs to be even or close to even so we can sit on it, right? As soon as those legs go way too long or way too short, now we're out of balance and the stool falls down, okay? And that's when you start getting symptoms. So it's really about the balance in the immune system. And when we use say corticosteroids or anti-inflammatories, really what we're doing is we're just shifting that balance out. We're not actually activating or inhibiting things. The other thing that microbes do, and this is going to be a little hard to see, but I will offer my slides to anybody who would like them. You just leave me your email at the end. Dopamine, GABA, norepinephrine, serotonin. These are all neurotransmitters associated with good brain function. Ability to sleep, ability to feel calm, ability to connect, ability to feel pleasure. Okay? All of these molecules are actually are produced by microbes. A lot of microbes facilitate the production of these. And actually we think that about 85% of serotonin is manufactured in the gut, which is very fascinating. And this is just some examples of that. So our bacillus bacteria tend to produce dopamine and norepinephrine. Both of those neurotransmitters are involved in depression. The phytobacterium produces GABA. GABA is calming, allows us to be able to fall into a cycle of sleep. And then another one called Enterococcus that helps produce serotonin. The one that's not up here is lactobacillus, which also helps with serotonin production. And this is what you'll see in a brain map of somebody who has true serotonin function problems. See the very low alpha back here, very blue, right? That usually indicates poor serotonin function. And the interesting part is when we have an immune challenge, okay, so the nervous system gets a signal that there's immune problems, and it may even be in the gut, right? And it doesn't need to be severe. You don't need to have salmonella or anything like that. It can be minor. It gets a signal that there's an immune problem. It actually uses the precursor of serotonin called tryptophan. And for any of you who've ever had a big turkey dinner and then had a big old nap after, right? Talk about tryptophan being the problem. We produce a bunch of serotonin and then we produce melatonin. I don't know if it's that or all the beer and wine and other things, but what ends up happening now is that molecule is used for an immune response and it's not used for serotonin anymore. And so this is kind of interesting how we kind of learned about this was somebody before and after treatment with a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And you can see the change, how much less blue there is in the back of the brain. Serotonin has a lot of functions in the back of the brain, and it tends to be more inhibitory, which is why you see it in that particular frequency. But you can see the shift. But what you don't see is really a shift in the rest of it, right? And it kind of peaks out, it plateaus. That's as much as you're going to get. So unless you go and figure out what's actually causing that immune response, you're going to just be plateaued where you're at. I want to talk about something called chronic inflammatory response syndrome because it's not being talked about and very few professionals understand it. We call it SIRS for short, okay? What happens in SIRS, 25% of people have a susceptibility to what we call biotoxins, okay? What this means is if you live in a borderline or a slightly above average house that has high levels of mold spores or mycotoxins, you'll build them up. And usually what will happen is you're going to see, one person in a family is sick and having problems. Nobody else is. So nobody ever suspects that mold's a problem, okay? Alberta Health has a guideline, a mold index that's at about, we'll say it's a 10 just for simplicity. Okay, it's about here. 25% of people will start getting sick here. And they'll start building up mycotoxins more than they're able to clear them. The initial immune response does not recognize them. When you have these HLA, which is a fancy term for an antigen that's produced by our immune system, they get in, they build up, and they trigger what's called the innate immune response. It's a very old immune response. It's all it knows how to do is start everything on fire. So fire happens across the brain, and this was something I found out for myself when I was having problems. Although I thought most of my issues were head injury induced, and they probably were, this was a problem that wasn't shutting itself off for me. And there's a lot of symptoms of this. You see fatigue, shortness of breath, nighttime sweats, weakness, abdominal pain, temperature regulation problems, aches, diarrhea, joint pain, headaches, numbness, memory problems, morning stiffness, depression, appetite swings, mood swings, all sorts of different symptoms that come up because of the effects it has at the level of the brain. Okay, it affects our glands that regulate all of our hormones, not just our sex and our stress hormones, all of our hormones can get thrown off. So it causes us symptoms across a wide range of of clusters. So, you know, and I always found this, you go and talk to your doctor, you have 10 minutes, you say more than 3 symptoms, and they're like, I don't know, man, like, what one do you want to work with first, right? So this is important, and again, I can get you guys some more info on that if you guys suspect that it may be a problem for you. But it has been a problem in Calgary in the last 5 to 10 years. This is what I like to use is something called a visual contrast test. You cover one eye, and you look at shades of gray. These little, they start very thick and they go thinner over time. Each one of these is a different type of gray scale. And if you fail in columns D and E, which means that you have X's below 7 on D and or E, you could have a problem with biotoxins. And what the way that this works is when you have biotoxin problems, one of the very first things that happens is your capillaries, which are like a term for a small blood vessel. Okay, so when you cut yourself and you bleed a little bit, that's capillaries being damaged and now you're leaking a little bit of blood. What happens is these capillaries actually start getting hypoperfused. They're not getting good flow like they should be. And you tend to get cold hands, cold feet, sometimes to the point where they're like blue and purple. I've worked with a few people that it's quite severe to the point of even almost Raynaud's. And what happens is the retina actually has the smallest capillaries. So the back of the eye is the area where the smallest capillaries sit. So by looking at this, we can see how that contrast dysfunction can get an idea of if somebody may be affected. And then the other thing that I look at is sinus problems. Okay, people tend to overgrow a special type of staph in the sinus cavity. And because of its proximity to the frontal lobe, you start getting frontal lobe symptoms like depression. Right? We have to emotionally regulate through some of our orbital and medial prefrontal regions, and if those are being affected by exotoxins, it's going to be a problem. And this is just again, if you're a nerd like me, love this, the brain-immune interactions and immunotoxicology. So we call these immunotoxins because of how they affect the immune cells. And they actually cause the immune cells to be the thing that inflames us, right? So it's actually not as much the toxins as it is the immune system inflaming. And then we use another cool thing. If you guys have ever had an MRI, you can do something called a quantified MRI. And you can actually look, instead of having a radiologist look at it and go, yeah, I think it looks good. We actually run it through a computer and quantify the exact size of all the brain areas. Okay? And if you're having problems, this is one of the advancements of MRI that we've actually been able to see. By looking and quantifying this, you can actually tell what problems you may be dealing with in terms of infection, PTSD, head injury, TBI, and toxicity. So it's a very useful tool so you know that what you're doing is actually taking you in the right direction. And I posted this article, and anyone who follows me on Facebook probably saw me post this about a week ago. Depression in your 20s linked to memory loss in later life. We actually think depression in a lot of people could be early signs of neurodegeneration, which sounds scary, but we actually have solutions for now. Okay? So when we start getting these problems, it can actually be indicating us that, okay, hey, there's some immune inflammatory thing going on that I want to deal with. And so obviously we see memory loss later in life, and it could be because of that. So I hear this too. If my depression is due to inflammation, why don't I just take anti-inflammatories? Right? So tricky question, right? It's one of those things where, yeah, it could give you some improvement, but you're going to hit your head on the ceiling very quickly because you're not addressing what's causing the inflammation. In some cases, you can't take enough anti-inflammatories to counteract what's actually happening via the triggering of the immune system and whatnot. And the thing that makes it a little bit complicated is something we call a tripartite synapse. To keep it simple, I call it the neuronal threesome. Okay, so we have one neuron sending a signal to another neuron. And then we have another cell that's not a neuron, it's called a glial cell, that is actually mediating the communication between the two. Okay? So what we used to think was, okay, there's these two synapses, so if we just like shove some chemicals and stuff in here, we can get the communication to change. right? And that's what we do with things like SSRIs and Wellbutrin and that sort of thing, is we're just working on systems within there. But what we failed to recognize until recently was these cells actually have the ability to detect what's around them and release inflammation or anti-inflammatory compounds. And if something is bothering that cell, it will continually release inflammation, and you won't be able to get the communication between those two neurons under control. Okay. So we're gonna do a little dance. Who's a good dancer? Who wants to come up and be a volunteer? Nobody. Am I gonna have to force people to come up? Okay, I'm just kidding. We're not gonna do too much dancing. I'm not a good dancer either, but I just want to make an example of this because I think it's important for people to understand. So, anyone want to come up? Come on. All right, love it. Thank you. Come on. We need 2 more people. 2 more people. Yes, thank you. What's your name? Amber. Corey. Thanks so much. 1 more person. 1 more. Liz, you want to come up? Okay, so you guys are my neuronal threesome. Okay?
All right.
So you're gonna be
Exactly.
you're gonna be the presynaptic neuron. Okay, so you're this neuron on the left. You're the one who's gonna tell Stephanie what to do. Okay? Liz, you're just actually you guys just come up like a little bit. Yeah, for 1 step, perfect. Liz, you go behind them. Okay? Perfect. Okay, Amber, what I want you to do is I want you to just do a little back and forth. If you want to shoot the pistols. Yeah, perfect. Just like that. Back and forth. Yeah, I love it. Love it. Okay, Stephanie, I want you to, every time that she goes back and forth 3 times, I want you to yell, danger.
Okay.
Okay? Liz,
Danger.
I want, perfect. Okay.
Danger. You keep going.
Yeah, I love it. You got it.
Danger. Danger.
Love it. Okay. Press pause. What I want you to do is, as I get closer to you, I want you to start dancing more on one side than the other. Okay? When she does that, you're going to yell danger every single time she changes. Okay? All right. So I'm gonna be a rural Albertan pathogen infection. Okay? And as I get too close to Liz, she's going to be uncomfortable, and she's going to go off balance. So we're going to see what happens. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm just done.
Yeah.
Danger. 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 Danger.
Ah, perfect. I love it. Give him a hand. So every time that something bothers that cell, like Liz with the green cell, right? Whether it's pathogens, inflammation, toxicity, metabolic problems, damage, right? You'll see this happen in pain, but you'll also see it happen in drive, depression. Because again, it's a survival thing. So if that neuron feels like it's endangered, the danger system activates in the brain, and when it happens too long, what do? We go into faint, freeze, or play dead. And that's what triggers those symptoms. And this is what I show people if I don't want them to learn anything. All right, so what can you guys do? What can you do today to work with inflammation? Okay. Now again, you want to look at the cause if that's what you think is going on. And again, I highly recommend acute EEG. Whether or not you get it through us or someone else, I'd gladly take a look at it to let you know what I think, what I see. But you need to know what subtypes you're dealing with. What I like to recommend to people is an 8-week trial of an anti-inflammatory, either low lectin or autoimmune paleo diet. They're not easy diets to do, which is why I say do 8 weeks and see if that improves your symptoms. Okay, if it does, it's a good indicator that you're probably dealing with some inflammatory problems and you're probably dealing with some gut problems. So what we remove grains. Okay, the one grain that I usually say is okay is quinoa, but you want to remove all grains, including corn. You want to remove nightshades. Okay, they're high in lectins. They can trigger the innate immune response. Nuts, seeds, beans, and legumes, same thing, right? As you can probably see, this diet's not going to be sustainable long term, but like I say, it can help in the short term. And the other one that is kind of surprising people is eggs. And it's actually the egg white, not the egg yolk, that is the problem. Egg white has a chicken albumin in it, which actually our body looks at as a foreign type of what we call albumin, and it can react against it. Now the other thing is sweat, any way you can. Okay, if you can sweat from exercise, awesome. If you can't tolerate enough exercise to sweat, doesn't matter. Okay, you just need to be sweating. So whether it's a sauna, whether it's hot yoga, whether it's a bath, okay, whether it's a steam sauna. I'll let you guys take a picture of that if you want. The reason why I say that is there's a researcher at University of Alberta named Dr. Stephen Genwis. He's been doing these studies for over 20 years. He's looking at what toxicants, or a fancy term for toxin, right, substances that are toxic to humans, what are circulating around in the blood, what is cleared through urine, and what is cleared through sweat. Okay? What he found was 95% of known toxicants can be cleared through sweat, whereas only 40% are cleared any other way. Right? So very powerful. And he also did research on the types of ways we sweat, and he found there was no significant difference between exercise, sauna, hot yoga, and hot bath. Didn't matter what you were doing as long as you were sweating. And actually, by sweating, you do release growth factors, which are important for rebuilding neurons in the brain and connections.
Sorry, who was the main researcher there?
Dr. Genwis, Stephen Genwis. Sorry, it is a little blurry. I wanted to make it big, but obviously, although I'm young, I'm not that good with technology, as you can probably tell. But if you want, I can send you these slides too after if you'd like, so you have all that. Now, the other cool thing to kind of get away from depression a little bit and talk about neurodegeneration, which again we think depression has a little bit to do with, but neurodegeneration, like Alzheimer's and dementia, the Finnish sauna study was just published in 2016. What they looked at is the amount of times people saunaed and the rates of Alzheimer's. And in Finland, I don't know if you guys know this, but it's like a religion to sauna. Like they do it at least once a week. And so what they did is they took a group of people that only did it once a week. They took another group that did it 4 or more times a week. And they found that the group that did it 4 or more times a week had a 67% reduction of Alzheimer's, which is incredible. Like our drugs that we've developed have only been able to hit 2% effect on Alzheimer's. And sweat response was bringing it down to 67%. It's amazing. And we know now, when we look at Dr. Dale Bredesen, who wrote The End of Alzheimer's, we know now that the environmental toxins actually have an effect on that neuronal threesome. Let's go back to that here. And cause it to go inflammatory, which causes cell breakdown. So by getting some of those toxins out of your system, you'll actually help improve that. And the longitudinal research is already showing that. The other thing that I'm going to comment on is dental hygiene. Okay, I don't know if you guys saw the article that came out recently on something called Porphyromonas gingivalis, fancy term for bacteria that can cause mild forms of gingivitis. But it was actually an implicating factor in neurodegeneration. And we know if we're dealing with inflammation, with depression, it's important that your teeth are healthy. And this would have been the last thing I would have ever thought when I was in my master's studying this stuff, that would have had an effect. I used to be the guy who never went to the dentist. And now it's like I floss twice a day, I oil pull, I brush, I'm vigilant because I know that if I don't, I'm going to be building up low-grade inflammation over time. The other problem that I find is root canals. Root canals, you want to have them checked thoroughly to make sure there isn't any bacteria in there because it does have a direct access to the bloodstream. All right, trauma. Okay, so there's 2 types of trauma in my mind. Okay, the way I look at it is to keep it simple. There is mental emotional trauma and there's physical trauma where we actually hit our head physically. Okay, so I'm going to talk about emotional trauma, all right? So we have this little system in the brain called the limbic system. And it's ran by this area called the amygdala. Has anyone heard of that before? Amygdala? Oh, great. Amygdala is simply our fear center of our brain, okay? it actually remembers everything that's ever happened to us all the way back to where our 3rd trimester while we're in our mom's womb. Incredible. So it remembers all of the bad things and all of the good things. And when it figures that there's something happening around us that's reminding it of a bad thing, it fires. And when it fires, it has the ability to hijack the brain. It's basically the emotional survival system, okay? And what you'll see in a brain map is you'll see, for instance, this person, the limbic system at rest was hijacking their frontal lobe. So they couldn't focus, they're depressed, and they couldn't regulate well. All forms of the functions of the frontal lobe. Organizing their life was difficult. Motivation was difficult. They weren't finding pleasure in things anymore because they were being hijacked. Their limbic system was detecting threat response. Okay. Now, 95% of our decisions are emotional. They're actually made on the emotional level. We make the emotional decision before we're even conscious that we have. So there's this whole idea of logic and emotions. Logic comes second. The emotional reaction always happens first. Right? And it's the way that the brain develops and why that happens. And so this system is largely threat detection. That's its job. Okay? So everything that we see, everything we hear, everything we smell, we taste, and we feel in our body is fed up through here, and it's relayed to the limbic system. It's like a handoff to the limbic system. Like, hey man, is this dangerous or is this safe? The limbic system goes, it's safe. Okay, we can approach it and we can continue moving forward. If the stimulus is considered dangerous, we get the limbic reaction, right? We either withdraw, we run, we fight, we get angry, whatever needs to happen in order to get through that survival. And some people are unlucky, have either multiple traumas or a lot of consistent trauma through development, and this gets stuck on. Okay? And we can't compare traumas. Some traumas are very small, and it's enough to trigger the brain to get stuck on. Other people, they have very large traumas, but their brain somehow regulates it, and it's okay. So I see sometimes actually one of the biggest ones, because we overlook it, is birth trauma, right? Because this system is actually online when we're being born. And so forceps, C-section, being in NICU, early surgery, stuff like that can actually have quite a large effect on behavior later in life. And sometimes it starts earlier. We don't know how to predict when it's going to start, but that is generally what's happening with the limbic system. Is it has these bad memories, and then it starts hijacking everything. And you have to teach it that it's okay, and that what's happening right now isn't like the past, and there's multiple ways to do that. And so again, I bring the road signs back up because this is what the limbic system does. So consciously, when we first start driving, we recognize all this stuff, and then over time, we only recognize that. Well, what happens with the brain is the limbic system of the brain in particular, and the thalamus, actually is always seeing everything. Always. Whether we know it or not. Okay? So in data science, essentially, in neuroscience, and then looking at how much the brain can compute, we compute a terabyte of information every second. So I have this hard drive here that holds 50,000 articles and a ton of videos, and it's only like a quarter full, right? That's a terabyte of information. We're only conscious of 2,000 gigabytes of that a second. So it's about 1 times 10 to the negative 9% that we're actually conscious of. This is a very small amount, but this limbic system is still reacting to everything that might be going on around it. This is a very interesting phenomenon. This is what happens when the brain makes an emotional decision. And this is tricky to pin down, because our brain is basically a belief system machine. Right? So when it sees something, hears something, smells something, tastes something, or feels something in the body, it can elicit either a left-sided burst in the frontal lobe, a neutral, where it's the same on right and left, or an avoidance burst. Okay? And the more that we have a burst on the left, the more we agree with things. Okay? So if somebody says to me, you know, Trump is a great president, my brain's like, oh, I'm just kidding. But that's how it kind of works is when we have the stimulus, our brain will either decide whether it likes it and agrees with it, or whether it doesn't, right? And it's one of the reasons why it's difficult to have political conversations, is because it's a very emotionally charged topic, and sometimes you aren't able to bring the logic to it. It just reacts on either side. Ideally, we'd like to be neutral on both sides, because then we can be logical. We're not wanting to bounce into avoidance. Now, with addiction, you'll usually see too much of this when exposed to anything related to the substance or behavior of addiction, okay, whether it's food or drugs or whatever. You'll usually see this massive burst out of the left when there's any cue related to it. And this is, I always find really interesting, because this is a lot of the disconnect that happens between our conscious mind and our emotional brain. There's a colleague of mine who published this research, which I think is incredible. He gets people to fill out a questionnaire like this, where it says, I can calm myself in tense situations. 1 is strongly disagree, 5 is strongly agree. Okay, so he strongly agrees that he can calm himself in tense situations, but when we show his brain this, his brain actually goes, no, we can't, right? And so very interesting the split that can happen there. But it's always the emotional response first. And so I like to teach people this, because we get this response, and you guys ever have like judgments about yourself? Where you're like, oh, I'm such an idiot, or I'm worthless, and there's this, boom, and it happens. And then we are aware that the thought happened, and then we just get into it, and we're like, yeah, and we start finding all the reasons why we're an idiot, right, or why we're worthless. Right? And we just like feed into it. But we actually have the ability, every time this happens, we have the conscious choice to go, okay, that was just a stupid belief pattern that popped up. Right? It's actually not true. It's just this thing in my brain. It's my little child brain that's trying to help me survive, right? And so you can actually you can just go, okay, oh, that judgment was crazy, weird. Little Corey in there is really freaking out today. But you do have that ability to make that decision on whether you're gonna then turn and look for everything to support that, or whether you're gonna turn and go, oh, what are the things that I can look at to actually negate that? So that can be very helpful, understanding that it's just a different part of your brain reacting to try to help you with survival, right? It never shuts off. We need it. We wouldn't be here. This is an article, again, if you guys like this, early developmental emergence of our amygdala, so that fear center, and the prefrontal connectivity from maternal deprivation. So we know that, kids who are adopted, kids who go through foster care, kids who have multiple caregivers, early trauma, mom dies early in life, mom is sick early in life, stuff like that can impair those circuits, and then you as an adult have to do a little bit more work to repair those. But the brain is plastic, it's changeable. It doesn't mean you're stuck with it. Right? That's just like using genetics as an excuse. And here's another same kind of article, just talking about how our connections to emotionally regulate emerge when we're an infant, before we're logical, right? This is why you can't tell a 6-month-old to stop crying and tell them why they need to stop crying or why they should stop crying. You just got to figure out what it is they feel like they need, or what needs to be calmed down, and then they stop crying, right? Over time, you can bring logic into, why people can need to be calm. And then these are brain maps of people I call this failed behavioral modification. And this is important because a lot of us are going to get directed down the talk therapy path, okay? Cognitive behavioral therapy. Although it's useful, right? A terabyte of information a second being processed on the lower levels is going to make it really difficult to talk your way through these things. So if you've gone through that and you've failed that, don't lose hope, and don't think that again, that it's something you're going to be stuck with. It's just, this is a different system. So these are 2 examples of people that have failed behavioral modification. I see this time and time again, right? When we're being hijacked like this, especially in the frontal lobe, it makes it very hard to change our behaviors or change how we think, because a lot of what we think is actually from those lower areas. It's mainly what we make the decision on. Again, if my brain wants to tell me I'm an idiot, am I going to give into that, or am I going to go, okay, that was just a belief system based on something I can't explain, but I don't need to. I know where it's coming from. But it's important to do work and learn about yourself, learn about your history as best you can. There's a lot of good books. I love It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin. Again, if you guys are interested in this topic particularly, I can get you that info. Amazing stuff. So, Carl Jung, who was Sigmund Freud's essentially predecessor, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life, and you'll call it fate. We do this to ourselves too, right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, it always happens to me, right? This is just, I'm always the one that this happens to. Oh, if it's going to be somebody, it's going to be me. No, it's not. Your brain is telling you that, but it's a judgment. It's a belief. You have the ability to break through it. This is how I felt when I was going through my limbic trauma. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. And it's sometimes funny with trauma because this is what happens. Like you'll react to medications in the complete opposite way that you would expect to react. And your doctor will be like, I don't know, like you really shouldn't be reacting this way. Like I think a lot of it's in your head. It's like, yeah, it is in my head. It's my limbic system. You're trying to shut my limbic system off and it doesn't want to, right? Let's talk a little bit about physical trauma. I'm not going to go into too much depth on this because we are going to be doing an event on concussion in the future, so we'll talk more then. But with head injuries, this is an example of a whiplash injury, but essentially the brain is going to bounce in the head. Okay? And when that happens, you can get inflammation, and you can also get shearing of the wiring in the brain so it doesn't communicate as effectively anymore. Okay? Now, problems from this can take decades before they kick in. Okay? So for me, for instance, my problems didn't start until I was about 2021, and the last major head injury I had was when I was 17. So it took about 4 years before it actually kicked in full gear. But the hormonal problems and the immune problems that result from head injury, they turn themselves on, and then it's just kind of this momentum builds and builds and builds and builds, and eventually your symptoms can start. So you'll see this with the violence and the suicides and stuff in the NFL, right? Is a lot of these guys, some of them weren't even being diagnosed with concussion. It was just subconcussive blows, which essentially means it's a blow to the head that isn't enough to cause a true diagnosed concussion. And this is what it looks like sometimes after a head injury. This is what we call encephalopathy. It's a fancy term to say brain dysfunction, right? And what I want you to turn your attention to is this big mess right here, okay? So what an EEG should look like is on the left, okay, where you have, your lines are fairly flat, they're going. You don't want to see this big earthquake. Okay, what that actually is the brain kicking out. It's like the brain goes to sleep for a second. Okay, I think this guy is about 1.5 seconds. This is actually a friend of mine. His story is he's 22 years old. He's at the Benelto Rodeo. And I don't know if you guys know what Benelto is. It's like 100-person town just west of Red Deer. We grew up not far from there, so we go at the rodeo and I'm sure he had way too many drinks, but it's the rural Albertan thing to do. And then there happened to be a couch out in this rodeo. And so I don't know what the couch is doing out there, but he decided to climb up on the couch and do a backflip. He got halfway around the backflip and landed on the top of his head. We called the ambulance because he's drunk and now he's hit his head. So we called the ambulance, he goes off. Yeah, you have a concussion, go 3 weeks later, you'll be fine. He was, he was fine. But about 6 months after that, his mom and his family actually started realizing that he was starting to get very angry and reactive and frustrated. And his memory wasn't very good. They'd ask something, he'd do something, and he'd forget, and he'd go off, and he'd forget to come home with what he needed to come home with. And they thought nothing of it. Like, this guy's in early 20s, typical guy. And over time, he started getting depressed, and they started realizing it. He started realizing it. He put on over 120 pounds in a year. His behaviors, his decisions were all weird. I remember he was the guy we always called Flaky. right? It was always like, is Chris gonna come? We're like, well, he said he is, but who knows, right? Like we might not hear from him for a month. And he finally came to us, I think it was in 2017, and was like, like I'm really down. Everyone at work thinks I'm stupid because I can't remember. He's like, I literally cannot remember things no matter how hard I try. So they're like, okay, well, good, man. Like, let's look at this. And we hook him up, and within the first 30 seconds, we see this. And I'm like, man, he has encephalopathy. His brain basically, it was from here all the way around, was switching off every 10 seconds for a couple seconds. And it wasn't enough to cause seizure. It wasn't enough for him to like black out. It was just enough where he couldn't quite put that memory into the memory bank, and he couldn't quite regulate his mood, right? And so he was actually essentially having an inflammatory process going on in there, and it was a communication problem. And when we looked at the deeper areas, and I'm not going to bore you too much with this language, but there's an area called the anterior cingulate that sits kind of about 2 inches in, right behind the middle of our eyes. It's the most important network in the brain, or area in the brain for mood regulation and cognition. It's actually the access point to many of the other areas in the cortex. So he was inflamed in these areas, and he was inflamed in area 25, which is related to major depression. If you research Broadband area 25, it's one of the most correlated areas with major depression. It sits right in the middle of our frontal lobe, up towards the front. And then he was having issues in 10 and 11, which required us to shift perceptions about ourselves. And so he was actually really like, we looked at it, and we're going on some neurofeedback. And it was about 6 months later, he applied, and he's now out at Niagara College getting his degree. And it's like this night and day change. And if someone would have just looked at his brain 6 years ago, it wouldn't have been a problem. So love the way that the QEEG allows us to see that. And then the other thing that happens with head injuries is you can get something called upper cervical subluxation, where the upper cervical actually lateralizes or turns itself. And what you see here is actually a point. It's within kind of the spinal cord that's pushing against the brainstem. And this person is actually having POTS-related issues. So what you should see is what it looks like on the right, and see how much it's getting pinched on the left. So her body was actually wanting, it was like her body wanted to every now and then direct blood flow away from the brain. So she'd get episodes of fainting, dizziness, and over time starts developing depression because she's not getting blood flow up into the frontal lobes. And it was because of how the upper neck was actually thrown out of alignment. So we sometimes forget, but when we hit our head or hurt our head, our neck is also involved. Our head and neck are connected. And we sometimes try to separate them, but usually there's problems there. And he actually was dealing with, Chris was also dealing with some of that as well. So what can you do? Okay. So if trauma is a problem, again, look at what's happening currently more as a reflection of what may have happened in the past. It requires some introspection, some meditation, and that sort of thing. See if you can help meet with a therapist to help you process. But a lot of times it is actually what's happening now is just reminding you of a moment way back when. A moment where you didn't feel in control. A moment where you felt abandoned, right? So just take a look at that, because that's usually what's happening, is it's a reminder of something early. We love neurofeedback. I don't know if you guys know Bessel van der Kolk. He's one of the leading researchers in the world in trauma. He's researching neurofeedback like crazy right now because of its ability to work on kind of the unconscious, subconscious operations of the brain. We actually give feedback to the brain in various different ways to allow it to organize itself differently. So very cool. There's another one, you can look this up, called EFT. Now, I obviously can't give you advice on this at all, but if it's something you want to try on your own, feel free. It basically has to do with tapping and bilateral stimulation in the body, which can desensitize the limbic system. And then there's brain spotting or EMDR techniques, and there's a lot of people doing that around as well. People with the true trauma subtype will respond well to these. Okay? If you're not responding well to these, well, you probably don't have the true trauma subtype. There's probably another type of issue going on. Metabolic. Okay, fancy term for energy production. What produces energy? Mitochondria produce energy. These are little tiny organs inside of our cell. We have hundreds to thousands of them in every cell. Okay? The only reason that we can even build a human body is because we have these and they can produce energy for us. Okay? So they're called mitochondria. My cells need mitochondria for me to be a powerhouse. That's me lifting weights when I was 17 trying to bulk up. Didn't work well, as you can see. This is what happens in the brain when it doesn't get the metabolic input it needs. So on the left is kind of, a slight metabolic problem, okay? And what this person was doing was trying to exercise, trying to do physio, trying to do all of these different therapies to get their life back. And they were actually overloading what their body could handle metabolically. So you see that increase in alpha? So particularly there. More orange, yellow on the right side there. So when that happens, basically the brain isn't getting the energy it needs. And depending where it happens in the brain, you can get symptoms of depression. There's about 12 different areas in the brain that, if affected by this, you can get symptoms of depression. Okay? And when we look at this, what we look at is looking at balancing insulin and balancing glucose. Okay? These are really important if our blood sugars aren't getting into the energy cycle, or our fats aren't getting into the energy cycle, or our insulin's all over the place because we're eating unhealthy and we're spiking our insulin and then it's dropping and we're spiking it and it's dropping. We can get metabolic problems. It always happens in the brain before it'll happen in the blood. So it'll happen within the nervous system before you ever flag it in blood. So sometimes it's going on for years, decades, before you even notice that it's a problem. So pH, actually, monitoring your pH in saliva and urine is the most helpful for that, because you can start kind of seeing if that's falling out. But the way I like to describe it, anyone who's gone through Bio 30 had to learn about the Krebs cycle. Right? I had to learn about it again because I forgot all about it, so it didn't apply to anything. But basically, it's like a windmill. It's a biochemical windmill. And as long as that turns, we produce energy. If anything disrupts that turning of that cycle, we can't. Okay? And this is where exercise is really important. People who have the subtype of this will usually improve with exercise to the point of tolerance. We don't want to be overdoing it. And so with exercise, does anyone here know how long we need to exercise for good brain health in a day?
30 minutes?
30 minutes? 22. Very specific. I like that. We've actually found benefit as low as 10 minutes. Benefit as low as 10 minutes. Okay, which is really, for me, when I learned that, I'm like, oh, thank God. We keep having less free time for ourselves in a day. So to know that if I can just go for, say, a 15-minute jog or do 15 minutes of maybe higher intensity weight training or something like that, and that's giving me effect, and I'm happy. So a lot of times we think it's like, I need to get out there for an hour, I just don't have the time. Get out for 10 minutes, get out for 5 minutes, right? And some people are, depression and fatigue go hand in hand too. So you need to be careful about, you start maybe at 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and just slowly bring yourself back. And it's very important for increasing growth factors in the brain. Okay, we have these factors essentially called growth factors, and many different kinds of them, and they tell the cells to grow, right? And we need that for cells to grow and divide, and for us to grow new pathways in the brain, which is what we need to break through depression. It's very important. And actually, some of the research articles that have compared antidepressant to exercise almost always beats out antidepressants, which is kind of cool. Combine the two, probably get a combined effect. And then this other cool one with metabolic problems is called low-level laser therapy. There's lots of practitioners doing different types of laser, but it has an effect on the mitochondria. It actually causes, when mitochondria are exposed to low-level laser or infrared, they'll actually divide. So you start producing more mitochondria, which technically means more energy. Light, or electromagnetic radiation, a fancy term for it. Okay, so power running through our walls right now, the lights that we're being exposed to, the sun, our phones, this light here shining up here, Wi-Fi, all this stuff is all electromagnetic frequencies. Okay, and our brain produces electromagnetic frequencies. That is what we are looking at when we look at the brain maps. okay? Delta, theta, alpha, beta, high beta, and gamma. So what do you think happens when we expose our brain to unfamiliar electromagnetic frequencies? Probably going to get problems, right? So this was a report that was just released. It actually didn't get released to the public until November of this year, but it was the radio frequency study. Okay, what they did is the National Institute for Health in the States, which is the most funded, well-funded institute for research on human health in the entire world, did this big study on 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, LTE, and Bluetooth. And they did it on animals because apparently it's unethical to take people away from their phones and Wi-Fi, so we're not allowed to do that. So they did it on animals, and what was concerning were the behavioral changes in the animals, more anxiety, less sleep, and on the physical level, and of course we're not talking about this today, but cancer. Okay, levels were through the roof. It was significant. I read the report. It was kind of fascinating. It was, all this cancer problems without any indication in blood. All the blood markers weren't really significantly different. The only markers that were different were in menstruating females. They actually had more disrupted hormones, but everything else was normal. So we started looking at some of the data on EMF exposure that had been being done in the last 10 years. And these are some of the reported effects of overexposure. Mood problems, mood swings, anxiety, depression, headaches, poor concentration, fatigue, poor memory, dizziness, and pain. What we've found, that one of the markers that we've found in blood is called MMP9. Basically what it does is it breaks down the glue that holds our cells together. So our blood-brain barrier, right, has this matrix that kind of holds things together. Our gut has the matrix that holds things together. Our joint areas have a matrix that holds things together, so the immune system can't get where it's not supposed to go. But when this MMP9 goes high, it can do that. And MMP9 is one of the major factors in metastatic cancer. It's what allows cancer to metastasize. And so that was why they were finding, I believe, is why they were finding such high cancer rates in these animals. But when MMP9 goes high, inflammation goes high. So what I usually recommend to people is, especially if you're having headaches, ringing in the ears, stuff like that. Sorry, this is one of the articles too, if you guys are interested. Microwave frequencies, which cell phones are, produce widespread neuropsychiatric effects, including depression. And I remember when I started learning about this, because I was not a physicist by any means, I remember thinking like, oh man, our cell phones are in the microwave range. I remember my mom used to never let me sit by the microwave. It was start the microwave and walk away. And and now I'm carrying it in my pockets and right by my reproductive organ all the time. So yeah, kind of interesting, right? So yeah, I highly recommend shutting Wi-Fi off at night. If you're talking on the phone, the further you get your phone from your head, the power density you're exposed to drops exponentially. So even just having your phone sitting on a table on speakerphone, or I have a set of wired headphones that I put in with a mic in them, and that's how I talk on my phone. So there's a lot of things you can do to start kind of reducing your exposure to that. It's tricky if you live in an apartment building, because of course there's Wi-Fi in every condo. I think in our condo building we pick up 30 Wi-Fis when we turn on. So turning ours off doesn't do a whole lot. But now the other thing I bring in, and this is kind of a topic of its own, but social media. And this is a big, there's actually a researcher down in the States who's looking at, psychologist who's looking at the effects of social media on the developing brain. And we think this is where we're seeing such a spike in adolescent and young adult depression, is we are so externally focused on what other people's lives look like. So this isn't something to sell you on my social media, it's tell you to limit it, okay? This is the problem, okay? Here's what they say. Eat 5 small meals per day and run. Also eat only breakfast and dinner and walk. Also eat lots of protein and lift, and don't do cardio, it's bad for your joints. Also don't eat too much protein and make sure you're sleeping a lot. But don't be sedentary, but don't be too active, it's bad for your blood pressure. Make sure you replace all your lost salt, but never eat too much sodium. It's easy, just eat vegetables, but don't eat potatoes or corn. Fruit is obviously good for you, and also it's sugar, so it's bad for you. Sugar, I forgot to mention, is a vital source of quick-burning carbs that your brain needs to survive, and you should avoid it at all costs. Protein's hurting your kidneys. Make sure you eat a lot of it. Drink water. Never starve yourself unless you're calling it intermittent fasting. And then it's okay to starve yourself a little bit. Don't overhydrate. Being vegan is obviously the healthiest lifestyle, and also it's not. Fish is obviously really good for you, and it's full of mercury and killing you. Get some sun every day for vitamin D and for skin cancer. How accurate is that? Right? That is what goes on. We're so confused because of everyone sharing all these articles, and no one knows where they come from, but it's enough for the emotional brain to go, oh my God, I need to make sure I avoid that, right? And that's the problem on the effect of social media, is even if we consciously don't register it, our limbic system did, and it made a decision on whether it believed it or not. So this is Gene Twenge, San Diego State, looking at teens. The more time teens spend looking at screens, the more likely they are to report symptoms of depression. The data is incredible on how this is affecting the younger brains. And to be quite honest, I mean, of course it's worse in the developing brain, but anyone who's older than that, it's affecting them. You know, if I sit on social media for an hour, I can even just feel the difference in how I feel from doing that. So the other thing with metabolic issues is sleep hygiene. Okay, really important to check out your sleep. And there's a Center for Sleep in Calgary that I don't even think you need a referral to go. You can just go, and they bill through Alberta Healthcare, and you can get a sleep study to make sure that you're sleeping properly and that you're breathing properly and your airways are open properly. And 50% of people with sleep apnea don't snore, and they don't wake up when they stop breathing. So you won't notice it. All of a sudden you're just getting fatigued and depressed because you're not getting the metabolic energy that the brain needs. So oxygen, very important, as you know. Try holding your breath for a few minutes, right? So what else can you do? Spend less than an hour daily on social media, and I challenge you to do even less than that, right? Do other things, right? I actually, on my phone and stuff like that, I don't even have the Facebook app popping up, so I can't even see notifications or anything like that. And if it wasn't for keeping up with friends, I wouldn't even have it. Unplug your Wi-Fi at night or when you're not using it, okay? It's the modems they make now. You used to be able to get routers that you can just plug Ethernet cords into, and it doesn't look all that good, but you're running Ethernet cords all over the house. But they now have, I don't even think you can really deactivate the Wi-Fi in them anymore, so I just say just unplug it at night. If you have a breaker box that switches your power off in your bedroom, is even better. Make sure your phone's not plugged in right beside your head. Make sure it's on airplane mode, and if it's not, have it out in the hallway. Okay, and even like you've seen these people's phones starting on fire, and they have them under their pillows. Crazy. Use airplane mode frequently. So if I'm carrying my phone, I'm always in airplane mode unless I need to use it. If I need to expect a call or a text, I shut my data off. So I don't know if you guys know how to do that. You just literally shut your mobile data off, and then you'll get calls and text still. But it decreases the power density by about 100 times. This is very helpful to do. And the Bluetooth and wireless headphones, you know, again, suggesting that especially if you're having problems, it's good to reduce that. Now we have a hormonal subtype as well. Okay. Usually it looks like this in a brain map. Hormonal, endocrine, neurotransmitter problems are going to be reflected in this way. We have something called the steroid pathway. Okay, so our cholesterol, and I always laugh because we call LDL cholesterol bad cholesterol. It's not. We need it to make hormones. We need it so that our cell membrane isn't rigid, so it can actually be flexible. Otherwise, the membrane can literally break. So LDL is not bad. Oxidized LDL is bad. We don't look at it in Alberta Health. This is what allows us to produce pregnenolone, and it produces all of our sex hormones, testosterone, DHEA, estrogens, progesterone, and our stress hormone cortisol. And if you have any problems, imbalances here, which there's a lot of issues can happen, no menstruation, around menstruation, around menopause, the hormones are going to go kind of a little bit out of whack. If they go too far out of whack, you can start having symptoms of them. Doing so. And in the brain, this is just looking at estrogen. Actually, just one type of estrogen, estradiol. We actually have 3 types, men and women. Prefrontal cortex, for executive function, working memory, and mood regulation. Okay? Learning and memory, regulation of temperature, sleep, and food intake. So that's where you get your hot flash problems, is at the hypothalamus. Sensory integration at the thalamus. Raphe nucleus is the serotonin system. Locus coeruleus is the adrenergic system for energy, arousal, wakefulness, cognition. Right? So all these areas are very important. That's just estrogen. So you can imagine how much the brain has issues if hormones are out of balance, right? Now, prefrontal cortex, amygdala, hypothalamus, thalamus, hippocampus, raphe nucleus, locus coeruleus, and posterior cingulate problems are all correlated with depression. You can have any one of them. And this is my favorite. I've had lots of people tell me this. There's no research on hormones in depression. And I go, okay, search it. Google Scholar, 700,000 results in 0.11 seconds. Okay, guess not. And this even actually is kind of cool, the thyroid hormones one. Role of thyroid hormone in depression. This is an interesting one because some people with low thyroid will get anxious and depressed. Other people just get tired. And they have other symptoms, tired, weight gain, that sort of thing. The difference between the 2 groups is usually people who get anxious and depressed when they have low thyroid is where it's happening in the brain and if the limbic system is tagging it as a threat. So that limbic emotional system even has the ability to tell what our hormones are doing. It's fascinating. So if it tags that metabolic problem as a threat, it usually makes it emotional and makes it worse. And then we have so many other hormones. This is my favorite hormone in the entire body. It's a peptide hormone. Yeah, anyone who works with me knows that. MSH, okay, melanocyte stimulating hormone. When we first found this hormone a long time ago, what we found was it was what allowed us to tan. Okay, so when we got exposed to UV light, either through the eye or on the skin, it got released and it allowed us to tan. So we just went, okay, allows us to tan, that's it. Then we started studying it further, and what we found is it regulates the immune system, specifically the mucosal immune system. Okay, so the sinus cavity, the gut, the vaginal tract, the urinary tract. It also regulates dopamine. It regulates serotonin, very important when you're talking about depression. It regulates cortisol for energy. It regulates our sex steroids, sex hormones and other steroid hormones. And so, I mean, basically every function you can imagine. And it even regulates water resorption. Okay, antidiuretic hormone. For anyone who's drank more than a couple drinks of alcohol or coffee, what happens? Immediately have to urinate, right? It's because it blocks antidiuretic hormone, which normally will reabsorb your water. The other thing that antidiuretic hormone does is it actually is responsible for remodeling the circuits in our frontal and temporal areas associated with mood regulation and memory. So very important that is being regulated. And if you have problems with frequent urination and you know that you've been exposed to mold or other biotoxins, very commonly this MSH hormone is low. And we look at vitamin D, vitamin D3 in Canada. You know, we're quite vigilant about that now. We're like, okay, we don't get enough sun for like 8 months of the year, right? Starting October 1st last year. So we do vitamin D, but what we forget about is MSH. And MSH is released from the brain. It's a higher level hormone. It regulates so many other things. You can sometimes get your doctor to test it. It can be tricky. You have to be a bit persuasive, but it's a very important one. You have your thyroid, you have insulin, glucagon, and leptin, appetite hormones, right? So Carly, actually, if you guys want to talk to her after and ask any questions about nutrition, she's a nutritionist who works with us and can help you kind of navigate all that. But it's really important to have those appetite hormones regulating properly. And there's so many others. And then I wanted to talk just about some other drugs too. Cannabis. And I get a lot of questions about this now because of obviously the legislation now allowing cannabis to be legalized. Is like, can I do it? Can I try it? What should I do? What I recommend is if you're gonna try it, do it in an oral oil formulation, okay? And if you deal with problems with anxiety, be careful with high THC. That's all I'll say. Smoking it, not great for the metabolic problems, but definitely taking it internal can be very helpful, especially if you're looking at immune inflammatory regulation problems and metabolic problems. It can be helpful, but again, you know, look at it as kind of a temporary thing to help take the edge off, but like look deeper at what's actually driving things. So what I say, ditch the oral and the hormonal contraceptives, okay? If you're premenopausal, there's virtually no data that shows that it is helpful for mental function in the long term, okay? Sometimes in the short term it can be. Now, I totally understand people have trouble with their cycles and can end up with tons of pain, and it can be very helpful. But again, that's another thing. You can work with functional medicine practitioners. They can help you figure out what might be causing that, so you don't have to be on these. If you're on them for ease and convenience, right? Most people don't like what I have to say. There's not a lot of good alternative options, but you are going to get hormone disruption. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. And a lot of times I see women who've taken these for too many years, they come and we just cannot get their hormones balanced for the life of us. It's very difficult. So, cruciferous vegetables, very good on the hormonal system and the hormonal detox, adding those in. Limit coffee. I challenge you to not do it every day, okay? Caffeine is very hard on estrogen metabolism. Very hard on estrogen metabolism. It's mainly the caffeine that's the problem. Exercise, amazing. So you see exercise has gotten thrown in here about 3 different times, right? So if you can pick up even a small exercise routine, it can be very helpful. Stop smoking. Do what you need to stop smoking and limit drinking. Cannabis, again, if you're going to take it internally. All of these have significant effects on hormone regulation. Diaphragmatic breathing techniques that you do in yoga and meditation are incredibly helpful to lower cortisol if that's a problem. That's the stress hormone. And remove endocrine disrupting chemicals. Most endocrine disrupting chemicals are plastics. You know, we're seeing all these different types of plastics rolling out now that are BPA free and that sort of thing. As we research them, you know, my thoughts are they're probably going to come out being a problem as well. Go get glass. Get glass containers. Drink out of glass or stainless steel, stuff like that. Shampoos, conditioners, lotions, other beauty products. Check the labels. You're going to see parabens, phthalates, and they'll usually have like a methyl in front of it or a bisphenol or something like that. Just pay attention. Anything that says paraben, phthalate, just cut it out, okay? And the last thing I'll talk about, purpose and aligning with your values. This research is quite significant on this, and the self-reports, when people feel they live a purposeful life, rates of depression are much lower. So somewhere deep down, we know what we value, and we know a little bit about where our purpose is. Make sure you spend lots of time on that. Spend time on yourself. That's going to be huge for helping yourself out. So just to recap, conventional medicine treats symptoms, not the causes. Natural medicine can sometimes just treat the symptoms, not the causes as well. They can be effective in short term for severe depression, mild to moderate. The effects are, variable. Talk therapy is very effective if the problems are at that level, okay? But if they are a limbic problem, you might not get the changes that you're looking for. But like I say, don't let it bring you down. Just now that you know, there's other things that you can look towards. The 6 main subtypes: inflammatory, immune, trauma, metabolic, electromagnetic, endocrine, and purpose. And if you can address all those subtypes, you can heal. And I've seen it time and time again. I'm just going to show you an example of that. So this is a lady that came to see us, 46 years old. Her anxiety was an 8 out of 10. Her depression was a 10 out of 10. Now she was medicated, which I insisted on her making sure that she had some medications to support, but she still was just said like it's the worst depression she's ever felt. She was in pain and she was on disability. She couldn't work for 10 years. whether it was mental, then became physical. This poor lady had almost every subtype was a problem. So as you see, she's having problems in delta, problems in theta, problems in alpha, problems in beta, and problems in high beta. This isn't uncommon for us to see. What this meant is we were going to have to address every level over time. So we ended up finding that she had a Babesia infection, which is it's like a low-grade malaria, North American malaria. It's interesting. You should look it up. It's vector-borne, but it can also be transferred in utero from mom to child. And I typically see it where there's a history of arthritis down mom's side. She had physical and emotional trauma. She had major hormone problems, and she couldn't self-regulate very well. So we put her through neurofeedback. We knew we had to do that with the physical network communication problems, the emotional trauma, and getting her to self-regulate properly. So we basically, what we do is we give information back to the brain, and we let the brain organize it, and it shifts its level of function. It's a very interesting process. And so that's just a bit more info on that, and how we actually recognize real-time fMRI and how neurofeedback could work for actually even major depressive disorder. And another one there for you as well. And another one. Apparently I was excited about that research. So she came to see us March 2017. By January 2018, that was her brain map. And she actually had full improvement of her anxiety and depression. She was ranking her anxiety at a 2, but her depression was gone. And she's actually able to go back to work full time. You know, in the grand scheme of things, 10 years, took her 10 months. And I think that's amazing, right? So she just had to have some patience and persistence and kind of know what was going on. So again, your story matters. Don't let it define you, okay? And another brilliant colleague of mine, Carly, says, some say everyone is the author of their own health, but often the editor is required to guide the author to the proper ending. And that's what you can do, is be the editor of your story. All right? Thanks so much, guys. Now, I just have just a quick comment. I think it's the table right outside. There are some surveys on the table outside. We really appreciate feedback. We always want to know what people want to know more of, what they want to know more less of. What was I being annoying about? What did you want to learn more about? Did you want me to stop talking 30 minutes ago, or did you want me to talk 30 minutes longer? So if you could leave your feedback, it'd be greatly appreciated. And we also offer, for anyone who might be interested in working with us or just want a complimentary call with one of us to just learn a little bit more about your particular situation or what you might be able to do, we offer complimentary phone calls, 45-minute phone calls with a healthcare advisor. Okay? You just go to this website, neurvana.ca/go, and the schedule will pop up and you can schedule a time to speak with one of our advisors. All right? Thanks so much, guys.